and welcome to the annual Loyola Marymount University Interfaith Forum on our topic this evening of religious responses to COVID-19. My name is Dr. John Sebastian, and I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President for Mission and Ministry at Loyola Marymount University here in Los Angeles, and as the moderator for this forum. Our program tonight is sponsored and supported by LMU's Center for Religion and Spirituality and the Martin Gang Institute for Intergroup Relations. The Center for Religion and Spirituality is a continuing education center at Loyola Marymount University, which focuses on public learning and pastoral ministry, theology, and spirituality. The Martin Gang Institute for Intergroup Relations is an endowed institute dedicated to the promotion of understanding between religious and ethnic communities in Southern California, and is jointly administered by the Center for Religion and Spirituality at LMU and the American Jewish Committee of Los Angeles. We are live on Facebook tonight, opening this conversation to the wider public, but in a special way right now, I'd like to welcome the Center's students in the Catholic Bible Institute, Contemplative Practices, and Parish Business Administration Professional Certificate programs. Welcome, it's good to have you all with us. Our gathering this evening is timely, our topic urgent. Nostra Aetate, the Second Vatican Council's declaration on the Roman Catholic Church's relation to the world's other religions, opens by reminding us that, quote, day by day, humankind is being drawn closer together, and the ties between different peoples are becoming stronger, end quote. This is the context for the Council's reflection on the interconnectedness of all peoples who seek after what is, quote, true and holy, end quote. It is also the context for our discussion tonight of the resources that the Abrahamic faith traditions offer us as we confront the devastation of the coronavirus and contend with the unfortunate reality that our differences continue to be seen by many in our world as opportunities for vilification, oppression, and competition, rather than as sources of strength, innovation, and charity. Nostra Aetate also calls all of us who work in Catholic institutions like LMU to take interreligious dialogue seriously as a requirement of our own faith. LMU's mission statement speaks to this call in articulating that, quote, the service of faith, which is part of our commitment as a university, the service of faith also honors the reality of religious pluralism on our campus and embraces ecumenical and interfaith dialogue in formal and informal contexts, end quote. Our mission statement continues, the desired outcome of such encounters moves us beyond tolerance to mutual respect and understanding. It deepens appreciation of one's own faith, and it creates opportunities for engaging others who share a longing for meaningful lives. So that's what we're here for tonight. Now, the function of a good moderator in these kinds of things is to get out of the way. So that's what I'm going to do now. We have three outstanding panelists with us this evening that you're about to hear from. Dr. Amir Hussain, professor and incoming chair of Theological Studies at LMU and a scholar of Islam. Rabbi Mark Diamond, senior lecturer in Jewish Studies at LMU and former executive vice president of the Board of Rabbis of Southern California. And Dr. Kim Harris, assistant professor of Theological Studies at LMU and a scholar of liturgy. I will introduce each of our panelists more fully in turn. But before we begin, I want to share with you a few ground rules for this evening's proceedings. Tonight's panelists have been invited to prepare presentations that have at their core the teachings of their faith, rather than personal opinion. Each will speak only for their own religion and not try to interpret the religion of another. Now, for all of you participating with us tonight on Facebook, questions to any or all of our panelists may be written in the comments section below. We'll do our best to address as many as possible within the time allotted, and we request that you follow these guidelines. First, no ad hominem questions or comments, please. That is, no comments that attack a person's character or motivations rather than a position or an argument. Second, please keep on topic. Questions and comments should be relevant to the discussion at hand. Third, please don't steal the mic or derail the conversation. We don't wish to distract participants from the discussion at hand, so please don't hold side conversations in the comment section. Questions or comments that are not respectful of these guidelines will be deleted. Similarly, those who post inappropriate or offensive comments will be blocked from commenting further. We will take a couple of questions after each speaker has completed his or her remarks, and we'll make sure we leave some time at the end for an open conversation among all of our panelists. Finally, for both panelists and participants, I'd like to share 4 points that will ground tonight's forum. Number 1, let's agree to disagree. It's assumed that people deeply hold their religious beliefs. Therefore, in a spirit of mutual respect, we may agree to disagree on each other's point of view. Number 2, let's hear each other. All involved seek to create an environment in which people feel free to share their deepest religious beliefs, such as their perceived purpose and motivation, and to truly hear each other. Number 3, some do's and don'ts. We are here to participate in order to share, explore, educate, and learn, and not to debate, convert, proselytize, or judge. And finally, number 4, let's work to increase our respect for one another. Although there are no attempts to proselytize or change the faith of another going on this evening, individuals may enlighten others to the reality of their faith, and thereby dispel myths or misinformation. Our goal tonight is understanding, greater harmony, and increased respect. And so with that, I'm ready and pleased to welcome tonight's first panelist, Dr. Amir Hussain, who is Professor of Theological Studies at LMU. He teaches courses on Islam and comparative religion. From 2011 to 2015, Amir was the editor of the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, and he is currently on the board of directors of the American Academy of Religion. He is an advisor for the television series The Story of God with Morgan Freeman. His most recent book is A Concise Introduction to World Religions, 4th edition, published in September 2019 by Oxford University Press. In 2016, he was a fellow at the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at USC. Welcome, Dr. Amir Hussain.
Thank you, Dr. Sebastian, for that lovely introduction, and greetings to all of you watching this. A word about Nostra Aetate, the Church's declaration of its relationship with other traditions, really extraordinarily powerful, and you know, it holds a special place in my heart because I am literally 3 days younger than Nostra Aetate, and the reason I mention that is my entire life has been in the shade of this declaration of how the church understands its relationships with other traditions. And so I want to spend just a couple of minutes, we've been asked to keep it to about 7-10 minutes, initial comments about American Muslims and what's happened here. So I speak both as a Muslim and as a scholar of Islam. And I want to just put this short PowerPoint presentation here for you to so you can see this, and it starts with this lovely icon of me that was done at St. Mary's University, which I'm smiling as I say this because St. Mary's in San Antonio is, as you can imagine, a Marianist school. And so that's part of this interfaith work. You know, we teach a Jesuit school. How do you reach out to other Catholic traditions? Well, this was me giving a talk at a Marianist school at St. Mary's. And one of the students, I think who was bored, but a wonderful artist, drew this and gave it to me on his computer. I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to use this now as my icon, here. But in terms of American Muslims, a couple of things to say. One is that we're an incredibly diverse group. Ballpark, roughly speaking, about the same number of Muslims as are Catholics. Ballpark, a little over 1 billion Catholics. Ballpark, a little over 1 billion Muslims in the world. In America, about 6-7 million Muslims. And as you see from that slide here, incredible diversity. So what's an American Muslim look like? It depends. African American, South Asian, people like me, at least a third of our community are people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Middle Eastern, in this town, Middle Eastern could mean Iranian, it could mean Arab, it could mean Turkish, white, Latinx. When we do this presentation in Spanish, you'll have one of the great Latino Muslim leaders, Imam Cesar Dominguez here. We tend not to think of that, but that's something. And so the reason I mention this is that we all know with COVID-19 that the impacts of it are felt differently among different people, disproportionately affecting African Americans, disproportionately affecting Latinx folks. You have Muslims who are African American The oldest Muslim communities are African American. At least a quarter of American Muslims are African American. So all the issues that affect African American communities generally affect African American Muslims in particular. Same thing with Latinx communities. The second point there on the slide, economic diversity. We think of American Muslims as an American success story, and some of us are. Doctors, engineers, business owners. This comes from the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, great source for things to do with religion. I'll give you the source in a minute. About a quarter of us, 24%, incomes above $100,000. We're doing just fine, able to ride out things, able to do things. But if you look at the second part, 40% of us have incomes below $30,000. And so again, we know disproportionately how COVID-19 is affecting poor people, how it's affecting communities of color. When you mix poor people with communities of color, you have that. And so, what's the effect been on American Muslims? Well, for some of us, it's been just fine. Others of us, it's been a horrible kind of thing. About 30% of us have a college or graduate degree. 70% Sunni, 30% Shia. Normally, I'd say a little bit more about those distinctions, but what's been fascinating is that within Sunni and Shia traditions, you've really seen the same response. So it's not that one group has done one thing, another group has done something else. You really see a unified kind of response here. And so a couple of the issues, and again, this is just really touching on them, and during the Q&A, and later we can go into a little more detail here. The daily prayer. For Muslims, you're to pray not just once a day, 5 times a day, ideally praying in community. Friday afternoon, congregational prayer. Well, you can't do that. They've just opened up houses of worship now, but 25% of capacity or 100 people, whichever is the least amount. For Muslims, the prayer is literally standing shoulder to shoulder. I don't know how you can do that in a physically distance kind of way. So that creates issues of having the prayers online. Burials, for Muslims, the guidance on burials was the same guidance that everyone had. No more than 10 people, all the kinds of things, what do you do in terms of washing the body? In a Muslim burial, you bury them within 24 hours of death. Those things have changed. We just finished Ramadan, the month of fasting. Eid was this Sunday, the holiday that marks the end of that month, typically marked with communal prayers and celebrations. And we were told by all the mosques, eat at home, Ramadan at home, stay home, don't do these kinds of things. The one issue that's coming up, and I'll stop here with a couple of other things, the Hajj, the pilgrimage, the 12th month of the Muslim calendar is the month of pilgrimage. That's going to begin around July 28th. The Saudi government has sort of curfews on Mecca and the holy places in Mecca. They're expected to release some guidelines, I think, at the next week or so, perhaps in the next couple of weeks, around can you do this? Can you bring in people? A lot of us, meaning from the Muslim community, have said to the Saudis, don't do this, cancel it this year. Worst thing you can do is bring literally people from all over the world to a central spot, have them mingle, and then go back. That's precisely how a pandemic spread. So yes, there's a religious obligation to do this, but the obligation that stands above that is the preservation of life. Don't do things that will violate people's health. Don't do things that will put people in difficulty with their health. This comes from the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, sort of a Muslim think tank, which I really like. Like what they've done is to say, okay, how have American Muslims responded? What do you do with American Muslim physicians, for example, who are on the front lines, literally working on this? What do you do with American Muslims who work, for example, in slaughterhouses, who are dealing with extremely high cases of COVID-19 because of the conditions there? What's been happening there? And so this resource is a great one. And then these are just some of the resources that I shared with you. That the Pew Forum really gives a great picture of religion. That's the one about American Muslims. The Shura Council is the umbrella council. Shura means consultation in Arabic. It's the big umbrella group for the Muslim organizations in Southern California. And that's their page for resources. The third one is a really interesting piece that talks about African-American Muslims. We don't think about the fact that at least a quarter of American Muslims are African Americans, people who've been Muslim for generations, in this country. What's the effect that's happening on them? And then the last one is that thing from the Institute for Social Policy Understanding about what are American Muslims doing? And it's sort of a database that's a work in progress, saying, put up things so we can see, and you can click on it by state, what's happening in California, what's happening in Maine, all those kinds of things. So don't worry about writing these down. We have these available, and I'm hoping that the Center for Religion and Spirituality will just send this PowerPoint to you. But those are some resources there. Quick way of talking about some of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amir. A reminder to our audience, you're welcome to send along some questions that we'd be happy to share with our panelists. In the meantime, Amir, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the experience of Ramadan this year, which was, as you mentioned, is just recently passed, and obviously was a very, very different experience. Maybe share a little bit more about what those traditions normally look like for folks who may be less familiar, and how this period of COVID-19 has had to shift not only maybe the practice, but also the meaning of Ramadan for you.
Thank you, John. That's a great question. Ramadan is really like the spiritual month for Muslims, without going into Rabbi Diamond's territory. For Jews, the Sabbath, one day a week you keep holy. For Muslims, the month of Ramadan, 1 month out of the year, you focus on these kinds of things. So it's that important month for Christians, for Muslims, very much like the Lenten season, let's say, is for Christians. And so the fasting is important. But at the end of each day, you fast for the day. At the end of the day, you break your fast. Ideally, you break that fast in community. You couldn't do that. You had to do it within your home. So you couldn't have that sense of the larger community of believers. That's one thing. Two, just from an economic standpoint, that for many Muslim communities, the month of fasting is when you give your charity. As Muslims, you're obligated to give to charity. Oftentimes, Muslims do it within that month. Oftentimes that's done at the mosque. You go to the mosque, you give a few dollars into the equivalent of the collection plate there, or more than a few dollars if you can afford it. But what do you do when the mosques are closed, where you can't do that? That thing. This whole idea of having food for the hungry. You know what it's like to eat. You know what it's like to be hungry, but then you can go, thankfully, to your fridge that's full of food. What about all the people that can? And what we saw really with COVID-19, all the issues amplified of food insecurity. Many people with no issue, you could eat lavishly, you could order takeout from restaurants. Other people who'd been laid off within the first week, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills, let alone eat, for this week. And so that sense of, in your body, if you felt this, what's it like for people who have to deal with this every day, not just for this month? That creates all sorts of issues. The celebration, the Eid, typically that will be the celebration that Muslims will go to, even if they're not quote unquote, religious, like in the same way that there are Christians who go to church regularly, and regularly means every Easter and every Christmas. There are Muslims who will go to the mosque regularly, and regularly means every Eid. So you'll have maybe 1,000 people at the mosque for Friday prayer. You'll have 5,000, for the Eid prayer. Well, you couldn't do that. You had to do that at home. And so that created all sorts of issues of how do you connect to the community. Different Muslim organizations did the prayers that you do online, and able to do that, trying to do the sort of fundraising. But that's taken, we haven't gotten the numbers yet, but I have no doubt that the fundraising, the charitable stuff will have taken a hit, because people physically weren't in the mosque, physically weren't doing those kinds of things. So that's been an issue. And then that sense of, you really get the sense of the community within your household, but you don't get the sense of the broader community. And you miss that. You miss the chance to see friends. Like at LMU, our Office of Muslim Student Life would do iftars for the Muslim students so they could come together. Well, couldn't do that. We did an iftar, a meal, interfaith one. Couldn't do that this year. First time in 4 years, we couldn't do that, kind of event to bring people onto our campus and be able to, offer them something to eat. And so huge issues for us this year. Very different kind of Ramadan.
Thanks for that, Amir. I suspect that we'll hear lots about the ways in which community and our understanding and sense of community has both necessarily changed, but really also caused us to appreciate things about what is so important about community for all of our traditions that we maybe have also taken for granted in the past and are really starting to appreciate in new ways now that we're distanced from them. I want to turn now to our second panelist, Rabbi Mark Diamond, who is a senior lecturer in Jewish studies at LMU, where he teaches courses in Jewish theology, in interreligious studies, and in Israel studies. He's also professor of practical rabbinics at the Academy for Jewish Religion, California. He's previously served as executive vice president of the Board of Rabbis of Southern California. Rabbi Diamond has led interfaith study tours of faith leaders, academics, students, diplomats, and community leaders, including a visit to the Vatican and Jerusalem, highlighted by an audience with Pope Benedict XVI. He is co-editor of a forthcoming volume of essays written by dialogue partners in the Jewish Latter-day Saint Academic Dialogue Project. Rabbi Diamond, welcome.
Good evening and thank you. Let me begin by thanking the Center for Religion and Spirituality of LMU and our moderator, Dr. John Sebastian, fellow panelists and colleagues and friends, Dr. Amir Hussain and Dr. Kim Harris. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I too want to share a brief PowerPoint to highlight some of the aspects of my talk. And let me see if I can do that. There we go. So I've entitled this Jewish Responses to COVID-19. Note the plural, Jewish responses. There is no Jewish response to anything, let alone this unprecedented pandemic. And I'll share at least a few of those this evening in my presentation. I'd like to begin with some texts that inform my own view of how to respond to a crisis in general and this particular crisis now. These are both pretty well-known biblical verses from the Torah. First from Leviticus 18:5, "You shall keep my laws and my regulations, which when a person does them, that person will live by means of them. I am God." Second text, also well-known from Deuteronomy, "I call heaven and earth as witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Now choose life, in order that you may stay alive, you and your offspring." From this, the rabbis of the Jewish tradition derive the following, that our purpose here on earth is to observe the laws and regulations in order to live by them, not, God forbid, to die by them. And ours is the freedom to prioritize life or death, blessing or curse. Therefore, choose life. It's such an important mandate in the Jewish tradition. And it leads to a principle that in Hebrew is known as pikuach nefesh, the principle of saving a life, which overrides, supersedes virtually all other commandments of the Jewish tradition. Saving life, preserving life is the paramount precept of the Jewish tradition. And that is the foundational precept, I think, that guides me and guides Jewish leaders and Jewish people, hopefully, during this current pandemic. I want to share with you some images of some various Jewish responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Starting from the upper left, look, deep cleaning a synagogue, trying to sterilize a synagogue during this pandemic, not an easy thing to do. The upper right, a well-known image. This is the Kotel. This is the Western Wall, the last retaining wall of the Holy Ancient Temple in Jerusalem, arguably the holiest site in Jewish tradition. You'll note from the picture the social distancing of the worshipers who are praying there. Certainly a much smaller number of worshipers than is normally the case. The image at the bottom right, a very large and empty synagogue. Very much the case these days. If you look very carefully, it's a small image, you'll see three individuals there, two people on the bima, on the altar, way at the front, and it looks to me like one worshiper sitting on the right-hand side of the sanctuary. Three people in the synagogue. And everything else is empty. And that is, our synagogues are empty now, as our mosques and churches are basically empty. On the bottom left, this reflects very much what Dr. Hussain said a moment ago, the tragedy, the sadness of funerals, the sadness and loneliness of families losing loved ones and having severe limitations placed upon them on funeral practices, burial practices, mourning practices during the COVID-19 crisis. My colleagues who officiated funerals with no more than 10 people, immediate family, the Shiva Minyan, the prayer quorum that's usually done for 7 days after someone passes away, typically now done on Zoom or Facebook with only maybe immediate family present in the room. And this is it's a real trauma, a real emotional toll this takes on the community. To lose someone is bad enough, but to have these limitations, these restrictions placed upon you in COVID-19, it makes it all the more difficult and traumatic. Those, I would say, those previous screen is what I consider maybe the curses of what we have. I want to share some blessings. There are blessings even to be found in the midst of COVID-19. One of my favorite images on the top left. As Professor Hussain notes, we just had a major Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Well, the Jewish festival of Passover came just a few weeks after people were ordered to stay in their homes. And attending a Passover Seder is, according to the Pew Forum, one of the most widely observed Jewish rituals in all of Jewish life. People observant, non-observant, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, religious, non-religious, everyone tries to go to at least one Passover Seder. My family, like so many others, held a Zoom Seder on Passover this year. First time with our children here and our children and in-law children and our brand new grandson in New York. I must say our grandson, who was 3 months old at the time, behaved better than anyone else, managed to behave nicely for an hour. It was a miracle, it was a true modern day miracle. But I want to highlight what's on the upper left there. A group of incredibly talented individuals from the music and film industries put together what they called the Saturday Night Passover Seder Feast. It was live streamed in the middle of the Passover holiday. It brought together an amazing cast of Jewish and non-Jewish celebrities, some of whose pictures you see there. It was alternately incredibly funny and incredibly serious, clever and creative. To date, more than 1.5 million people have watched this video on YouTube. And I'm proud to say the project to date has raised more than $3 million for COVID-19 research from the CDC Foundation. Just an incredibly fun thing. I assigned this as an extra credit assignment in one of my courses, and students loved it. Jewish, non-Jewish, didn't matter. It was just a blast. It was really a wonderful way to highlight the holiday when everyone was stuck in their homes. The upper right, how do families observe milestones like a bar and bat mitzvah ceremony? That's a great celebration. A young person turning 13 years old. What do you do when you're stuck at home and you can't go to the synagogue? Many families understandably chose to postpone the ceremony and the celebration. Others have elected to proceed online with Zoom bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies, perhaps with the rabbi and cantor online and with family and friends. It saves on travel costs. It's not quite the same. I must say, for those of us who like to say that sometimes the bar mitzvah seems like less mitzvah and more bar, this returns the mitzvah to the bar mitzvah celebration and bar mitzvah celebration. It's more about the ceremony, not the celebration, and it can be lovely. Lower right, we are witnessing an extraordinary proliferation of virtual prayer services, study sessions, community gatherings of synagogues and other Jewish organizations online. These virtual gatherings are becoming, certainly virtual services are becoming the norm in non-Orthodox synagogues. Orthodox synagogues have certainly a serious issue with using electronics on the Sabbath and holy days. But my own synagogue and many others are streaming services 2-3 times a day on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, on holidays, holy days. And it's a fascinating development. I see people online that I wouldn't normally see in the synagogue. But it's easy to sign on, don't have to get in your car and drive there. And it's becoming, it is a fascinating development. The lower left, how do Jews today fulfill the mandate of what we call in Hebrew tikkun olam, the mandate to heal and repair our broken world? Well, people are finding ways to do that. Jewish people, very often with their non-Jewish friends and neighbors, are responding to the crisis in unprecedented ways, preparing and distributing emergency meal kits, taking care of clothing distribution, recognizing that people who are threatened in our society, who are marginalized to begin with, are having an especially difficult time. And they're trying to find ways to do the mitzvah of tikkun olam. Let me, as we near the end of my presentation, let me share with you, I think, a couple of blessings and a couple of curses in the current pandemic. First, the existential, emotional, and psychological trauma of this time period will be with us for years to come. This isn't going away anytime soon. people who are losing loved ones, friends, colleagues, losing jobs, the erosion of traditional support structures. That's not going away anytime soon, and that's a real curse in this current pandemic. Secondly, the financial toll on nonprofit and for-profit businesses and their investors and supporters. We're going to see that's already having an effect. We will see, I believe, the closure and consolidation and downsizing of many, many Jewish congregations, educational institutions, Jewish summer camps, social welfare organizations. The financial toll is already happening. I believe it will only accelerate and causing great distress in our community. Third, we saw a rise of anti-Semitism even before the pandemic. We're seeing a sharp spike in anti-Semitism now, particularly in social media, people online, fringe groups blaming Israel, blaming Jews for causing the pandemic. And this anti-Semitism is growing worse and has to be dealt with by Jews and non-Jews alike. Then some blessings, I think. As I alluded to earlier, individually and collectively, Jews are discovering and utilizing new ways to communicate, to pray, to learn, to celebrate life cycle milestones, to observe commemorations. People are online who never were online before. People are using Zoom like never used before. And I think that's a positive. People are using social media, and they're still finding ways to come together. Next, Jewish congregations, synagogues, and communities are beginning to question and re-examine their time-honored affinity for buildings, what I like to call the edifice complex, right? You build a nice building, I'll build a nicer building. You build a beautiful synagogue, mine will be even more beautiful. You know, maybe it's time to look at that again and say, do we have other priorities? Maybe we don't need those buildings, or at least as fancy buildings as we have in our community. Lastly, in terms of blessings, I see many Jews, individual Jews, organizations that are reaching across interfaith lines, reaching across interfaith boundaries. They're recognizing we're all in this together, even as we recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has magnified the gaping socioeconomic inequities in this country and around the world. So people are banding together. I think it's a beautiful thing. And lastly here, as people of faith, I'd like to recall my favorite Jewish phrase, 3 simple Hebrew words, an ancient adage of our people, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. I want to close with a brief prayer. It's my adaptation and excerpt from Psalm 27, a psalm which in the Jewish calendar is recited in the month leading up to the Jewish holy days in the fall. It's a beautiful psalm, and I encourage you to read it. It certainly brings me comfort and strength in these difficult times. This is my adaptation of parts of the psalm. A psalm of David, God, you are my light and my help, whom shall I fear? You are the strength of my life, whom shall I dread? One thing I ask of you, for this I yearn, to dwell in your house all the days of my life, to behold your beauty, to pray in your sanctuary. Hide me in your shrine, safe from peril. Shelter me beyond the reach of disaster. I have faith. I have faith that I surely shall see your goodness in the land of the living. When I hope in you, I am strong. When I hope in you, I have courage. Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you for those powerful words and for your reflections. We do have a question. You've spoken a little bit, and we've heard this elsewhere as well, that the pandemic has really enabled us all to become innovative in terms of using technology to support worship and prayer and liturgy in all sorts of ways that most of our communities really had not undertaken seriously before. The flip side of this might be that some people are not comfortable with technology or are feeling maybe even more alienated than they ever have before. That's the substance of a question we have from Daniel, who says, could you please highlight why doing a Seder by Zoom could be challenging for Jewish individuals who find themselves using Zoom for the first time? And if I could just add to Daniel's question, I guess a corollary to that might be, what about for people who don't feel as comfortable with technology, or it poses a challenge for one reason or another? Are there other ways that you can imagine that folks can really re-engage with their beliefs, with their faith tradition, with their practice that might be different from what they've done in the past, but can be really meaningful in this moment?
Thanks to you, Daniel, and to you, Dr. Sebastian. Great questions and very insightful questions. Let me begin with the challenges of Zoom. I think it's a relatively easy platform. I was already using it to teach some courses at my other institution, the Academy for Jewish Religion. I'm very comfortable with it, but it is challenging. After the session tonight, I have a weekly Talmud class, and typically I'm the one who organizes it. And we have several, shall we say, older gentlemen who will probably email me every week asking, how do I get on? How do I do this? They all manage to do it, but it's not easy. And whether young or old, I found it curious this semester that I was actually helping some of my very young students, undergraduate students, with Zoom. I thought, oh my God, this old guy is helping young people with Zoom. So there are technological challenges, and it's not easy necessarily. It's not comfortable. But if you can find somebody who can sort of tutor you, help you, it can open up a whole new world. I'm seeing people on Zoom who I never saw before. I'm seeing people attend Friday and Saturday services in my synagogue who don't normally come in person. Now, maybe it's because they don't want to drive. Maybe it's because they have mobility issues. I actually predict that when this crisis is over, synagogues, for example, that are doing Zoom should continue offering that to people who can't get there in person. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. The Zoom? Now, the other thing I should mention is in the Orthodox Jewish tradition, there are some limitations. There's a question of whether you can count. In the Jewish tradition, you have what's called a minyan, a prayer quorum of 10. And there's a question among very observant Jews of whether that counts for me to be part of a virtual minyan online. It's an open-ended question. And even more so on the Sabbath and on Jewish holy days, you don't use electronics. So you're not going to have a Zoom service at typically an Orthodox synagogue, like my synagogue has on Friday and Saturday, and the upcoming Shavuot holiday starting this Thursday night. So that's a limitation. Can you get around it? Hopefully you could gather 10 people in your backyard. Some people are doing that. Social distancing, very important. I've seen some great examples of that. Frankly, I've seen some bad examples of where people in my community and in others are ignoring the social distancing guidelines, and I think they're running terrible risks. To me, again, it comes back to that mandate of pikuach nefesh, saving life, preserving life. That is the paramount precept for me and hopefully for all of us. So I hope that helps. It's a blessing, but some would say that social media can be a curse too.
Thanks so much. And thank you, Daniel, for your question. I think it really does help us, as you're saying at the end there, Rabbi Diamond, to really reflect on what it means to be committed to our neighbors in ways that we've had to rethink. What does it mean to be a good neighbor? What does it mean to save lives? What does it mean to do charitable work in this environment? So thank you for that. And now I'm pleased to move to our third presenter, last but by no means least, Dr. Kim Harris. Kim R. Harris is Assistant Professor of African American Thought and Practice in the Theological Studies Department of LMU. She holds a Ph.D. in Worship and the Arts from Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. Professor Harris is a member of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium and the North American Academy of Liturgy. While pursuing her Ph.D., she composed Welcome Table, a Mass of Spirituals. Welcome Table is a featured Mass setting in the second edition of the Black Catholic hymnal, Lead Me, Guide Me. Professor Harris is a musician and a recording artist. Along with Rabbi Jonathan Kliegler of the Woodstock, New York Jewish Congregation and Reggie Harris, she produced Let My People Go, a Jewish and African American celebration of freedom. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and if we're fortunate, she might even sing for us a little bit tonight. So without further ado, let me hand things over to Dr. Kim Harris.
So thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. And I bring you greetings from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I am sheltering in place here with my mom. But I also bring greetings to people that I know have gathered for tonight from around the country. Like, I've got some friends in Washington, D.C., and they said, oh, I'm going to check that out. So fantastic that we can be like this tonight. And yes, singing is involved. Just before I came onto Zoom tonight, I was watching a group of people. It was a news report, and they had gathered outside of the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels there in Los Angeles, and they were protesting. They wanted to come back to church. They talked about how much they missed receiving the sacrament of communion, of Eucharist, and they talked about missing the community of church. And they gathered there socially distancing, yes, and prayed the rosary together as part of their protest. And as I thought of them, three things came to me. One, we are grieving. 2, we are longing. And 3, we are creating. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Oh Lord, come by here. Oh Lord, come by here. The news has been moving so quickly. So I read just today about houses of worship will be able to be opened at 25%, or what did I understand? That it was 100 people or 25%, whichever is fewer. And I kept thinking there's so many questions that we have where, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles not yet open, the Diocese of Orange will be open. But the questions that keep coming from me in this time and coming from the tradition, the two. One is about hospitality, and the other, how do we continue to promote full and active participation in the liturgy? So, hospitality. So I think I'll pick right up where you left off there, Rabbi Mark, thinking about the technologies. There are many people in my community, in the Black Catholic community. Some are not good at all on Zoom. There are many of the parish communities that don't have the technology to be able to stream the masses live. And yet, this time period has opened up a place for leadership among young people. There have been times when some of our young adults have suggested that we use various technologies and stream the masses, and other people said, no, we don't want to do that. But now they're being called upon to help. So it's an incredible thing. There's a creativity that is being welcomed in a way that it hadn't been welcomed before. But there are still some people who will never be getting on to Zoom, and yet there are other ways to pray. I kept thinking, what is it that people are really missing? What are they missing? Yes, they are missing the Eucharist. But even in that news report, people talked about missing community. And so there's one parish that I know that during the week, they get everything ready to record the Mass, and they record it and they start showing it on Sunday morning, and people can watch it all day on Sunday. But then on Sunday afternoon, they actually have a Zoom prayer service where those who come are able to be interactive with each other and participate together. Hospitality. Others, they said, I'll never be able to do that. And so they get onto a conference call and say the rosary 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at noon. Others will get onto a conference call Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they'll have prayer first thing in the morning. And I kind of like that one because you never know what your hair is going to look like at 7:30 a.m. We are being creative. So how can we continue to promote that full and active and conscious participation? Well, in thinking about some of these technologies that we're using, I think we have to remember that we are people who are not only physical, but emotional and intellectual, social and spiritual. They're things that we're going to want to see from each other. They're things that we're going to want to hear from each other. But we also have to remember that when we gather, and one of the scriptures in the Gospel of Matthew 18:20, Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, and it says, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, and this is Jesus speaking, there am I in the midst of them. There am I in the midst of them. And I'm sure that that doesn't exclude Zoom, it doesn't exclude a conference call or even a streamed live or streamed recorded mass setting. And one thing that we do say within Catholic tradition is that Jesus is present in the gathering of the faithful in assembly, that where 2 or 3 are gathered. And Jesus is present when the word is read and proclaimed, the scriptures. And of course, Jesus is present in the Eucharist. Well, we have been severely challenged, friends, because for so many of us, we're not able to receive Eucharist and we grieve. And yet, this is giving us the opportunity to say we must take seriously what we mean when we say Jesus is present in the gathering of the faithful in assembly. We have to take that seriously now, more seriously perhaps than we have been taking it. And when we say Jesus is present in the Word of God, one of the things that I love about LMU is that on Sunday afternoon, we have a service of the Word. And it is a wonderful gathering. I think last week it looked like there were 80 to 100 people who had gathered onto Zoom. And yes, Jesus was with us, present in the Word of God and in some great preaching as well. So now we have to really take those things seriously. And we're talking about opening churches, and some people are saying, well, we're going to go back. And I know we're never going back. Things are going to continue moving forward. I know that there are some who are going to have ministries where they help those who are shut in be able to get onto online so that they can view a mass that will continue to be streamed even when people gather back into the church. So there are many ways that we can continue to be with each other, continue to encourage each other. And singing is one of those things that is a problem. We're still trying to figure that out because, of course, when you sing, you just spread the breath and the germs can be just incredibly infectious and even, unfortunately, deadly. So we have some challenges ahead of us. But even as we are grieving and longing, we are creating. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Oh, Lord, come by here.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thanks for singing and sharing with us. Thanks for your reflections. Several of us were talking before this started about this decision to open churches that you've been commenting on, and the Catholic faith is certainly a musical faith, indeed, as all of our traditions represented here tonight are. And you've alluded to this fact that going forward is going to mean some change. We're not going to be able to go back, at least not right away, to the kind of musical experience that we've had before. But of course, the music isn't just about having a little something different during the course of the liturgy, right? It creates that community as well. Our singers, our musicians engage with our community, invite them into prayer. We pray through our singing. What do you imagine will be the role of music in the church going forward? Are there adaptations that you're envisioning as we go back into this new space that will enable us to capture some of the different ways of speaking to God and to one another that we're accustomed to with music in our worship?
Yes, well, one of the things that has been happening is that, as you all know, we can't sing all together on Zoom. And so I know that there are times if I'm, helping to lead music in a worship when I'll say, okay, so let's, everybody put yourselves on mute And you can try out those harmonies you've always wanted to try while you sing along with me. But then that means that we're going to have to help people be able to sing, because they won't be able to sing because they're hearing someone next to them. But they might be able to sing because they'll see the music projected on the screen. And I know that Krista Silva is really wonderful at doing that for LMU. But they'll also be able to sing because they'll hear the person that is speaking and that is doing the singing. Now, when we get back to church, I don't know yet. Many musicians and composers and choir directors, we're all talking about that. Now, I know all of you have seen those little boxes where, you know, people will get a virtual choir together. And I actually know a parish in Atlanta, Georgia, they do a small virtual choir each week, which means, you know, by Tuesday, they know what the music is and they've recorded it on their phones and they've sent it into the person that does the mixing so that by Sunday, they've got a virtual choir. It is incredible, but it's a lot of work. But once again, leadership of the young adults in that parish. And that's Our Lady of Lourdes in Atlanta, Georgia.
Thanks for that. You know, we can now turn to maybe a bit of a group conversation here. And again, we welcome you to send in your questions or comments for the panel. And if you wish to address anyone in particular or all of them, just let us know that and I'll try and direct your questions in the right way. But while we're waiting for those questions to come in, I want to pick up on something that Kim just said, which is to reflect a little bit more with all of you on the opportunities that maybe you see in this transition to virtual worship and prayer and liturgy that we're all engaged in right now. Opportunities for engaging folks that have maybe not been in our mosques and synagogues and churches recently, who might find new ways of connecting us, and particularly our young people. Is there an opportunity in all of this to re-engage our youth in our communities by bringing our faith tradition to the spaces where they are digital natives and where they're comfortable? Are you seeing any of that in your communities, an attempt to leverage our situation to create new forms of outreach to our young people?
Well, I know that one thing is that I see some young people turning to some of the older forms of prayer. So not only things like the rosary but a group of young people get together every morning at 7:30 and evening at 5:30 for morning and evening prayer. And they do that on Zoom. And especially, you know, when they're in the house all day or they're just not able to get out, it helps to mark the times of the day. And so those kinds of things are really beginning to blossom in a new way.
I think there are opportunities. I think we need to be honest with ourselves and admit that sometimes it can be very intimidating to walk in for the first time into a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. If you don't know anybody, if you're coming by yourself, where do you sit? What do you wear? What are you going to do? I think the online modality offers a fairly, especially for young people who are comfortable with technology, offers a relatively easy way to experiment, to visit that synagogue, to visit that church. I know, you know, we talk in the Jewish community about synagogue hopping. Well, pretty easy to synagogue hop nowadays with virtual services and try things out. And of course, we all know of the phenomenon of religious nuns, NONES. And I think this is an opportunity to kind of try that and to virtually visit different places of worship. If you're new to this, in a relatively safe way to check them out. And I think that could be a great blessing. I find it fascinating that a Pew study, the Pew Forum did a recent study, found that 24% of Americans find their faith strengthened during COVID-19. The same study, however, found that in my own Jewish community, the percent was 7%. I'm not sure what that means, because I know of a lot of Jewish people that are going virtually, they're going online, checking out these synagogues. Maybe the way the question was worded, they didn't feel it necessarily dealt with their own particular faith, their own particular spirituality, if you will, their own identification with God. I'm still trying to process that disparity. But again, I think there are ways that people can utilize this technology to explore their faith and explore their spirituality.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that's happened within the Muslim community as well. But if you look again to the Pew Forum for the stats, only about half of American Muslims identify with a mosque. And that may be for lots of reasons. Part of it is Muslim clergy are not priests. We can do it. We're more like rabbis. You're the sort of in-house specialist, but anyone in the congregation can do anything there. You don't have to have a priest who does the kinds of things. So it's a little bit different than it is, let's say, for Catholics. But you may not go to the mosque because it's inconvenient. You may not go to the mosque because it's too far away. You may not go to the mosque because the parking is typically terrible if you don't have enough space to do that. You may find the message too conservative. And so I think exactly as Rabbi Diamond was saying, you now have, like, every mosque will do their Friday prayers, the Friday sermon, because in the Friday afternoon prayer typically is 4 cycles of prayer. The Friday afternoon prayer is 2 cycles because there's a sermon that takes the place of the other 2. And so all the Muslim schools have said, no, you can't just watch virtually and have that count. You have to pray the 4 cycles, but watching the sermon is a good thing to do. And so you really get that choice now, where you can see, okay, what's this person saying? What's this person saying? At LMU, we have our own Office of Muslim Student Life, and our the person who runs that, our director, Kenan Tawil, is a wonderful young man who sort of done some of the sermons. Then each night for Ramadan did a little Ramadan reflection, because again, that's the kind of community that you just can't have in the virtual world, where you're literally sitting around the same table, sharing a meal. Well, you can do it in that virtual kind of way. You have that kind of connection there. So I think in that sense, it does help a little bit in all the kinds of things that the students are used to. I say that as Muslims, probably behind every other community. It's a lot of the Christian churches, some of the mega churches, who've done the online stuff for years, that are really good at it. Like their sermons are like short films, very different than anything I try to post on my Brightspace page for my students, which is, deathly boring because it's just simply me talking. I don't have that skill set. But I think absolutely, to Dr. Sebastian, to your point, that's really what engages the folks, is not just can you tell the story, but how do you tell that story, and do you get my attention with the visuals and the effects and that kind of thing, or is it just some man talking at me for 20 minutes?
I think, to be fair, the online opportunities are a blessing, but also a challenge. This is the season of year when many synagogues, perhaps even most synagogues, are renewing their membership cycles. Jewish people, typically, if you're a member of a synagogue, you pay dues. You don't have a collection plate on Saturday or Friday or Sunday. Typically that's happening now through the summer as we prepare for the Jewish High Holy Days. Well, what's going to happen if many synagogues go online? This wouldn't be me, but I'll pretend it's me for a moment. What if I said, well, why should I pay dues to my synagogue? I can attend 20 different virtual services. I can attend services at a great synagogue in New York rather than Los Angeles that has this fabulous online service. Maybe I won't pay dues to my synagogue. It's not, if my rabbi is watching, don't worry, that's not me. But I think you see the point that it presents opportunities, but also challenges. Also, we all know of cases of Zoom bombing and the like. There have been a number of colleagues here in Los Angeles and elsewhere that have had their services Zoom bombed, people posting swastikas and anti-Semitic graffiti and the other anti-Semitic graffiti and the like, people spewing hate, interrupting classes. This is, as I said, this is both the blessing and the curse of social media, and it presents challenges, certainly.
Thank you all for that. I want to acknowledge a question, and I think I can maybe answer it for us, from Marlene, who notes that the opportunity that we have now, thanks to technology, to, as you say, sort of visit different congregations or different churches, also enables us to visit different faith traditions. And she was wondering if there's an accessible way for folks who are paying attention and listening in tonight to maybe spend some time with other faith traditions here. So I'm going to answer on behalf of the Center for Religion and Spirituality, although I have no authority to do so here, and say I'm fairly certain we can figure out some resources that we can make available through the center's website for people who are interested in learning more and attending services of one kind or another with different religious communities in and around Los Angeles. So we'll see if we can't get some information posted there. As we talked about earlier, as Kim mentioned, hospitality is such an important feature of all these traditions, and I'm sure we would all welcome anyone who's seeking. That also leads to another quick question that we had from Daniel, who heard us referring to nuns, N-O-N-E-S, earlier, and wanted a little bit more clarification. That term wasn't familiar. So anybody want to talk about the nuns in particular here? Or I can talk about the nuns, which is to say, it's short. Yeah, go ahead, Rabbi Diamond, please.
I'll start because I was the one who used the term. I like to tell people that when I was, I tell my students when I was their age, nun was spelled N-U-N, and she was a sister with a habit. Today, the Pew Forum talks about nuns, people who answer none of the above on their regular surveys of religious identity in the United States and elsewhere. People are either atheist, agnostic, or they don't identify religiously with any of the different traditions: Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, whatever. And that figure is growing. That's easily 25% of the American population. I think among millennials and Gen Z, it's easily 1 out of 3. And it simply means that there's a whole lot of people, particularly young people, who, don't find a great deal of meaning in, going to church, going to synagogue, going to mosque, or identifying in an active way with a religious faith. They maybe culturally still identify with their tradition. And by the way, I would say most of my students in my classes at LMU are probably fit in this category of religious nuns. And I think we make the mistake, though, of often dismissing them and saying, well, they're not religious. Many of them are spiritual seekers. They're looking for something. I certainly see this it's ironic maybe that a student coming to Loyola Marymount University who takes a rabbi's course in interfaith engagement, that's a pretty good place to check out Islam, to check out Christianity, check out Judaism, to find another site that you explore on your own in your interfaith field experience, and to kind of check things out. And so I'm finding a lot of that, at least at LMU and in the community. But this is the so-called religious nun phenomenon, as I understand it.
And Rabbi Diamond, you mentioned earlier in your list of curses and blessings that one of the things you've noticed within your communities is an increased interest in interfaith engagement. And I wonder if others of you are experiencing this as well, that this shift to this kind of online modality that we're in, the fact that we're all necessarily uprooted from our communities in some way, is creating new openness to this kind of dialogue or conversation, or even shared prayer and worship, new opportunities for that kind of coming together.
Yeah, let me start with that. And I think, as Rabbi Diamond alluded, like the first sort of major holidays in our faith traditions were the Jewish holidays. Passover happened first, then Easter. And so for Muslims, what happened with Ramadan and Eid was already, Passover and Easter had already happened. And so we were able to learn from, how do you do this? What's a good way to do this? What do you do? So in some sense, just even the simple logistic kinds of things, how do you do it? What are best practices, that kind of thing, looking to the Jewish and the Christian communities who've done this first. I think the other part is that kind of interfaith thing. And that some ways, that ties into, I think it was Daniel's question about the nuns that we just got to, that our students may not identify with a particular registration, but they're all engaged. They're all decent people. They all want to help. And so whether you want to feed the hungry because it is your Christian duty, or whether you want to feed the hungry because it's your neighborly duty or your American duty, however you want to say that, you want to feed the hungry. And so you come up with these kinds of programs to do this. The hard part is, the students spend so much of their time this way in front of the screen. They want other kinds of experiences, and that's the curse. You can't do that. You can't physically, let's go out there and do this kind of thing in a connected way. And you can do it in a socially distant kind of way. And I think that's going to be fascinating to see as we start opening up the churches. Do we start doing the kinds of things? One of the things, and John, about this better than anyone, through campus ministry, the kind of program of going out there, feeding the hungry, feeding people on Skid Row. You get hundreds of students who pack sandwiches, make lunches, go out there, do that. Well, how do we do that? Because that's an even more pressing issue now with COVID-19 among the homeless populations. But at the same time, given that, do you want students to be interacting with people who may potentially have the virus? It raises all these kinds of issues there.
We have a question from Elsie, who asks, what have been the opportunities during the COVID-19 emergency for families who may have to be their own small prayer communities in a more intentional way? How, from your perspectives, has the role of parents in teaching the faith changed in response to this, again, new reality that we find ourselves in?
I think as we're thinking about that, one of the things that I'm hearing again and again and again is people saying, we're eating dinner together, and we're eating dinner together every night as a family, and we haven't done that in years. And so gathering at table, gathering around the table, and then that, moving on from that relationship into, oh, we gathered and we were eating, and oh yes, and we said grace when we did that. So there's something about gathering at table that, people that are in their homes for so long, they're having a chance to do that more and more. And you can hear them mentioning that. You hear couples say that, oh, we're eating dinner together, and parents and children. And so I think that can lead to greater engagement in terms of spirituality, because, eating together, and of course, people baking bread, yes, lots of bread, but there's something about that there's a physicality to it, and there's a spirituality to it that I think can lead naturally into a place where parents and children and families together might want to also pray together around that same table.
I would add that people often ask me what's the secret to Jewish survival? What if any one factor has kept the Jewish people alive and going strong for so many generations? And people, it's not the synagogue, with all due respect. It's not the school. I think it's the family. And I think, as Professor Harris just indicated, it gives us now renewed opportunities to focus on the family and to recognize that parents and family members are educators, and you're seeing a lot more family education. You see, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I can only add here, as Dr. Sebastian indicated in my introduction, I do a lot of work with the Latter-day Saint community, and my LDS, my Latter-day Saint colleagues and friends, they have this wonderful institution of Monday night, which is family night, which is you don't have meetings, a night without meetings, what a blessing, and they don't go to the temple, they don't go to the meeting house, they sit with family and they study scripture and they play games and they tell stories, tell narratives, and that's a beautiful thing. And we certainly in the Jewish home traditionally on Friday night and Saturday and Shabbat, that's part of our tradition as well. It's part of all our traditions, I think. The notion of family, of parents in particular, being central as educators. And I think we've lost a bit of that in the world today, and it's not a bad thing to return to that.
Let me pick up something that Dr. Hussain just mentioned earlier, which is the reality that crisis, like the crisis that we're in right now, tends to accentuate some of the real social rifts that we already experience, that those living on the margins find their situations even more precarious than they were before. And of course, our faith communities have long histories and traditions of trying to act on behalf of those communities, to stand on the margins with those who are suffering. How have you found your communities wrestling with this imperative to really be there with the most marginalized, and the reality that COVID-19 has inflicted upon our social structure? Are your communities finding ways to continue to engage those in need in your communities? Is it still a struggle to adapt that particular part of your tradition to our current circumstances?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things about the African American community is that there's quite the relationship with church as a place that, we've been able to experience the type of freedom that we hadn't in some other places. Now, there have been, talk about blessings and curses. There are some religious traditions in the Church of God in Christ tradition. They had some gatherings in March, and because of those gatherings, they had 19 of the bishops in that communion died of COVID-19, and so many other people were infected. So, there's a real challenge there about what do we do? The church that's been the bedrock of our community. Now, one of the blessings about that has been that, here in Philadelphia, there have been African Americans that have said, I've gone to get tested to see if I have the virus, and I'm finding that it's more difficult for me to get tested than, my white counterparts. And so what are we going to do? So a group of Black doctors got together, and they not only go around Philadelphia, but they set up, pop-up testing sites in Philadelphia and in Delaware and in Pennsylvania and Delaware and in New Jersey. And one of the places that they typically tend to go to set up those sites is the churches, so in a church parking lot. And that they really were one of the first places where African Americans in this area could get a test very quickly, and you didn't have to have a doctor's note, and you didn't have to have all of these other kinds of things, but you could be tested. And for our community that's being just hurt disproportionately, we absolutely needed them to be able to do that. But how they were able to do that was by working together with churches.
And if I can jump in there, absolutely. The kinds of things that I mentioned in my remarks in that slide of, we're a bimodal community in terms of economics with American Muslims. A quarter of us are wealthy, successful, making more than $100,000 a year. You don't worry about the fact that the food prices have gone up 10%. You don't worry about the fact that, this store doesn't have, you can drive to that store and get it. What do you do with the 40% of us who make less than $30,000? And if food prices go up 1%, you can't do that. What do you do where you're counting on the school lunch program to feed your kids? And all of a sudden, there's no school lunch program. And all of a sudden, you got to be not just the person bringing home the salary, but you're now the kid's teacher, because the school is all online. And what do you do? And so that's the thing. We have American Muslims who are wealthy and successful, where you've got a live-in nanny at home who takes care of the kids. You've got American Muslims where you've got 4 people living in a 600 square foot apartment, with 1 bathroom and 1 computer that 4 people have to share. And so there's been this kind of hope that you actually pay attention to that you look, if you're one of those wealthy folks, do you see the marginalized folks within your own community as members of your own community? Or do you just look at yourself and say, hey, all my friends are doctors, we're doing just fine, we don't need to worry about this, but realize, oh, there's people in our community who are suffering, are marginalized or poor. What'll be interesting, as I said, it's too early to tell because we don't have the data with Ramadan ending on Saturday, Eid being on Sunday, just to get that sense of, what has been the charitable giving, what's been going on. But you certainly see those kinds of initiatives from different Muslim communities talking about the underprivileged, disadvantaged folks within the Muslim community, to say you're not just helping poor people, which is a good thing to do, you're helping poor Muslims, which is, an even better, if you want to say within the same faith tradition, within the same religious tradition, to do. But yeah, you have all those kinds of fault lines, if you will. And the frontline stuff can be, like, as I said in my short remarks at the beginning, you have 20,000 Muslim doctors, so many of them literally are on the front lines at risk in a very different kind of way because they're treating people. What do you do with the Muslims in Minnesota working in the meat packing plants, who are on the front line in a very different way? And we've come to realize it's trite that, are the frontline folks, not just the doctors and nurses, but the people at the grocery stores, the people in the food processing plants, the people in the food supply chain that make sure that we get the food here.
I note that we're nearing the end of our time together this evening, so I thought maybe we could close with one final question, really for all of you. Dr. Harris spoke earlier about the fact that we're all beginning to have conversations about what it will look like to go back to our synagogues and our churches and our mosques, but really we know we're not going back, we're going forward. We hear a lot of talk these days about the new normal, and we're still imagining and discovering what that's going to be for all of us. So as you look forward to your faith life, to the traditions of your community, to your worship, your practice, your observations, and so on, what your observances, what what's something that you're hoping to carry forward with you from this experience? Something new that you've discovered in your own tradition, some new resource, some new way of being with one another, some new understanding of some important tenet of your faith. What is something that you hope to carry forward with you from this experience of the pandemic that you think can enrich your tradition and your experience of it in your community going forward?
I would answer in one word: resiliency. I'm deeply moved by the resiliency I see in my own community and many other communities. People finding new ways to have community, challenging, different. It won't be the same going forward. As I said earlier, I think Gamze Yavor, this too shall pass. It's going to look very different in the future. And I think, again, in the Jewish community, I'm seeing just a great deal of caring and concern in general, and people who are finding new ways to live out what I think are the finest values of the Jewish tradition.
Thank you, Rabbi Diamond.
Yeah, and if I could follow on Rabbi Diamond's thing, I think the word that I would choose would be kindness. And what I mean by that is, we just finished the month of Ramadan, where it's not just about physically stopping yourself from eating and drinking. It's stopping yourself from doing all the negative kinds of things, the anger, the cursing, the lying, that kind of thing. That there's a famous saying of the Prophet Muhammad that, there are those who fast and all they gain from their fast is hunger and thirst. It's not just about the hunger and thirst. It's about the lessons you learn. And so do you carry those with you? And that's something you're supposed to do anyway. You carry that message throughout the year. But then you think about the horror stories and the wonderful stories, the people fighting over toilet paper, or the people checking in on their elderly neighbors saying, oh, you're at risk to go shopping. Let me shop for you. Let me leave a bag of groceries, on your front porch, so you don't have to worry about going into the grocery store. What do we carry? Do we carry that with us? Do we carry our best selves? Do we actually treat each other, as brothers and sisters to each other? Or do we, as long as I get what I need, I don't care about you. And we've seen both of those things happen.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that my community, especially my Black Catholic community, carries forward connection, because we're a relatively small community within the larger Catholic Church in the United States. So to be in good communication with people all around the country, so to really continue that kind of connection. So if a young person goes off to college, then they can still stay in contact with their parish, where they might find a cultural home as well as a spiritual home. So I'm hoping that we'll do that, and also that we will find our shut-ins, as you were saying, Dr. Hussain, that will say, I'm coming over to be with you or help you to be set up technologically so that you can be a part of who we are. So I really do hope that we carry that communication and relationship forward.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. I think there are many lessons here for us to learn about community, about what it means to be in the presence of God, even as Rabbi showed us earlier, as our mosques and our synagogues and our churches sit empty, that God's presence is palpably with us in ways that we've perhaps not been as attuned to in the past, but that this experience is really helping us to appreciate. So my sincere thanks to all three of our panelists this evening for your insightful reflections. To everyone who posed a question this evening, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And of course, to all of you who are watching this, either live or in the recording that will be posted after this event, thanks for your attention and engagement. On behalf of everyone at the Center for Religion and Spirituality, at the Martin Gang Institute, and at Loyola Marymount University, I wish you a good night. I thank you for being with us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected. Peace.